I would like to draw your attention to the stunning cinematography that is displayed in the trailer before we move on to discussing the content of the movie. There are a great number of incredibly stunning symmetrical photographs that have the appearance of unique works of art. Additionally, the costumes, settings, and other elements are highly spectacular in terms of their scale and production value. Despite its humble beginnings, The Chosen has come a long way since then. Malty D. Babcock's rendition of the traditional hymn, "This Is My Father's World," serves as the background music for the animated video. We pay particular attention to the final stanza, which emphasizes that even if evil forces are frequently more powerful, God is the King, and Jesus, who died, will finally prevail. This is the world that belongs to my Father. Oh, help me never forget that even when the wrong appears to be stronger than it actually is, God is still the ruler. This is the world that belongs to my Father. The conflict is not yet over. Jesus, who went to his death, will be satisfied, and the earth and heaven will become one. This theme is clear in the narrative architecture of the trailer, which opens and concludes with Jesus addressing his disciples during the Last Supper. The trailer is legally named The Chosen: The Last Supper, which is also the name of the film. Listen carefully, because I am going to tell you what is about to happen. Jesus says in the opening moments of the video. This is a really suitable sentence to begin the trailer with, because it provides us with a preview of the upcoming season. On a literal level, it is obvious that the majority of the events depicted in the teaser take place before the Last Supper. Jesus is going to have a conversation with his disciples regarding his impending death and resurrection, as well as maybe the judgment that will be handed down on Jerusalem. In the final scenes, Jesus looks to be praying. His hands are lifted and his eyes are facing upward. Yet the voiceover of Jesus states, "The hour is coming." This phrase appears multiple times throughout the Gospel of John and refers to the time when Jesus will be crucified and resurrected. Following the conclusion of the Last Supper, we are shown with a scene of Jesus bringing a whip along with him as he approaches the temple. In spite of the fact that the trailer will cut away to a number of other events, it is abundantly clear that this is the focus moment around which we are developing. It functions as a kind of frame within a frame, providing context and significance to all of the other shots that we see in the film. The arrangement of the shot, which depicts Jesus looking up at the leaders of the temple from below and being properly framed by the throng and the temple itself, conveys a very clear message through its composition. Jesus, the courageous underdog, is going up against the high and mighty religious officials of the temple, who are the gatekeepers in a literal sense. The remainder of the people who live in Jerusalem are currently observing the violence from a distance, waiting to see how it eventually plays out. Following the shot in which Jesus is seen approaching the leaders of the temple with a whip, we are shown the same moment from another angle, which appears to show another set of temple leaders that Jesus is attempting to avoid. At a different time, we get a shot of a scene in which a mob is around Jesus while he is having a confrontation with another figure. It's possible that this is one of the disputes that Jesus had with the Sadducees, Herodians, or Pharisees. Another possibility is that it is the scene in which the woman is caught in the act of adultery, which is something I am also anticipating. Subsequent to this view, we see another shot of Shmuel standing with Yanni and another Pharisee, with a mob surrounding them on all sides. Despite the fact that Shmuel and his pals appear to be spectators rather than the principal debaters, it is likely that this is also a scene in which Jesus is engaged in a debate. Following a jump in time, we are shown with a scene of Jesus riding a donkey toward Jerusalem, where a mass of people are waiting for him with palms in their hands. The disciples of Jesus are shown eagerly looking on as they watch Jesus join the crowd. We next cut to a shot of Pilate, who appears to be lost in thought as he looks out over the city. It's possible that he is observing Jesus' entrance, but it might also be at a later period. For whatever reason, the film wants us to comprehend that the entrance of Jesus and his encounter with the Jewish leaders are causing Pilate to feel anxious. When we get a scene of him slamming a table toward the end of the trailer, his worry and frustration become even more apparent than they were before. First, there is an image of Pilate standing, and then there is a shot of Caiaphas, who is likewise looking troubled, but he is not wearing the ephod. In response to the elders' concerns about Jesus, they decided to manipulate one of his followers, Judas, into betraying him because they were concerned about him. The dynamic between Judas and Shmuel, which was established in the 8th episode of the 4th season, will allow this to be done. It appears that Jesus is looking out on the temple at night with a melancholy expression on his face at the same moment that Judas is being brought in to betray him. Despite the fact that there is obvious beauty, for example, the chorus, there are also indications of corruption, which will be brought to light in a later section. It is obvious that he is unhappy with the current condition of his father's home and the things that are going to take place. Jesus is not the only one who is grieving over what must take place at this moment. One of the shots shows Shmuel having a difficult time deciding whether or not to assist in handing over Jesus. Mary, the mother of Jesus, is seen looking at him with a sorrowful expression, most likely because he has just revealed the manner in which he must pass away. There is also a dispute that takes place between Thomas and Caphne, who is Rama's father. There is also an image of Mary Magdalene, who appears to be a Cassandra figure, that is, someone who is aware of what is going to happen, but is powerless to stop it. Jesus' grief over the temple appears to lead him to fashion a whip, possibly the same night as the earlier scene of him looking out on the temple. Note this happens at night, which clearly suggests that the show will follow Mark's timeline, separating the triumphal entry from the cleansing of the temple, rather than having them on the same day as Matthew and Luke seem to suggest. In the course of our podcast chat, Victor and I came up with the hypothesis that Jesus might be making the whip out of Joseph's bridle, which was seen in the 3rd episode of Season 3 and the 8th episode of Season 4. At some point, most likely the following day, we see Jesus making his way through the crowded temple. A shot is taken of the people who were selling goats and changing money in the temple. These are examples of dishonest acts that Jesus speaks out against directly. As the throng watches in disbelief, we then see Jesus pull out his whip and eventually witness him let loose with a full-blown Indiana Jones performance. Numerous academics are of the opinion that the purification of the temple is intended to be a prophetic sign, serving as a warning of the impending judgment that will be bestowed upon Jerusalem, which Jesus will later foreshadow in a more specific manner. A clear hint of this interpretation may be seen in the trailer. Following the beginning of Jesus' use of his whip, we see a shot of Romans breaking through a door, Atticus and some Romans searching for Simon Z, with a couple of images in between, and a shot of the temple complex engulfed in flames while a Roman soldier watches. Despite the fact that the 2 earlier pictures may have taken place in the main chronology of the show, the shot of the temple being set ablaze is obviously a flashback to the year 70 AD, which is the year that Rome will demolish the temple as a response to the Jewish insurrection. When taken as a whole, these photos are intended to give the impression that the tension with Rome is growing. In addition, it would not come as a surprise to me if we saw Simon Z in a flash-forward storyline, particularly one that was comparable to the one that occurred in Season 4 with Mary Magdalene and Matthew. We see a shot of a circle dance that takes place at a celebration that looks a lot like a wedding. In fact, it appears to be purposely patterned on a similar shot of the wedding that took place in Cana during Season 1. Despite the fact that it is difficult to make out, the presumed groom appears to be Thomas, and he appears to be looking at his diminutive bride. We can only see her white hood or veil. In the backdrop, Jesus appears to be watching. This could very well be a dream that Thomas is having, in which he is envisioning what would have happened if Rama hadn't passed away. Attendees of ChosenCon have informed me that a lengthier portion of this scene was displayed, and that it is a wedding that Jesus happens to stumble into by accident. Considering that this is a part of a larger unfaithfulness topic, I have been anticipating a great deal of conversation and images pertaining to weddings and marriages, so this makes perfect sense. In general, I do not check for explicit spoilers outside of the trailer, but I did look at the story that was published in USA Today, along with the teaser that was issued. Despite the fact that the most of the information was previously known to us, the article did provide an answer to a significant point that I had been thinking about: when will Season 5 wind down? It is stated in the article that the finale occurs before Jesus' arrest. Although this does leave room for some ambiguity, it seems that my initial prediction or proposal was incorrect. At this point, it appears that the conclusion of Season 5 will take place either at the conclusion of the Last Supper or possibly at the time that Jesus and the disciples are praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. As a result of the fact that a brief teaser is not intended to catch everything, the absence of a character or scene should not be seen as evidence that we will not see it in the actual show. Undoubtedly, there are instances in which significant pictures or moments are preserved as surprises for subsequent trailers. When all is said and done, I believe it is important to point out what we have not yet seen. During the sacrament of washing the disciples' feet, Jesus, the Nicodemus, the Garden of Gethsemane, which we might only be able to see, as was the case with the trailers for the 4th season of The Chosen, which focused our attention on two major bookend events: the death of John the Baptist and the death and resurrection of Lazarus. The teaser for the Last Supper invites us to focus our attention on the cleansing of the temple and the Last Supper as the two primary events of the 5th season. There is a lot of logic behind this. The cleansing of the temple, which I anticipate will take place in Episode 2, will serve as a main trigger for the events that will take place in Season 5, putting Jesus and the leaders of Jerusalem on a path that will lead them to make contact with one another. In the meantime, the Last Supper, which I am now anticipating will take place in either Episode 7 or Episode 8, will serve as the season's finale, bringing everything to a head. To add insult to injury, when it comes to marketing, these two events are the most visually engaging moments to concentrate on. I believe that I was correct in my prediction that power and judgment will be important themes in Season 5, and I believe that my prediction was accurate. The trailer shows both of these in action at various points. There is a battle about who is truly in command, as evidenced by the stunning shot of Jesus' confrontation with the authorities of the temple, as well as by the several shots of authority figures such as Pilate and Caiaphas. In Season 5, we shall learn how Rome frequently appears to have power and authority, yet God the Father is still the ultimate king, who is leading the universe to his assigned ends. This is something that the song suggests we will see. In addition, the cleansing of the temple is presented in a very plain and unmistakable manner as an act of righteous judgment, a message that is only hammered home further by the brief snapshot of the imminent destruction of Jerusalem. After I have had more time to analyze the information, I might provide some further opinions on the trailer. But I hope that each of these is useful to you as you go through the process. In the event that you saw anything else in the trailer that I did not see, or if you have any other questions or predictions, please do not forget to share them in the comment area below. What can we expect from the 5th season of The Chosen? I recently wrote a piece in which I identified the most important events that took place during Holy Week. This is one method to answer the issue. However, a season of The Chosen is about more than just the events that take place. Each season delves into a different collection of concepts and ideas. Are you looking for an analysis of the most recent teaser for Last Supper? Take a look at one more post from earlier. In the 1st season of The Chosen, we are given a glimpse into what it is like to meet Jesus and to come to faith in him through his peculiar and unanticipated means. What it means to be chosen by Jesus and to follow him in relationship with other people is the topic of discussion in the 2nd season. In the 3rd season, we get a glimpse of what it is like to continue to put our faith in Jesus, despite the difficulties and expenses that come with becoming a disciple. In addition, the 4th season examines what it means for followers of Jesus to rise up, not via political pragmatism, but rather by having faith in the radical teachings that he imparted and in his potential to give resurrection life. When it comes to predicting the ideas and topics that will be featured in a forthcoming season of The Chosen, it might be challenging. The creators of the show have been given a great deal of leeway to determine the subject of each season by selecting which biblical events to feature and which individuals to center their attention on. But because we have a much better understanding of the themes and emphases that we can anticipate from Season 5, we also have a lot better understanding of the events that will be featured in Season 5 than we do about any of the seasons that came before it. I feel that power, judgment, and unfaithfulness will all be key topics that will be examined by the upcoming season of The Chosen, despite the fact that I am unable to predict the themes and concepts that will be included in the upcoming season of The Chosen. By the way, if you are a fan of thematic analysis of The Chosen, you might be interested in themes and theology of The Chosen Season 1 and Season 2, a blog series that is only available to my monthly and annual supporters on my Buy Me a Coffee page. It is also highly recommended that you check out my comprehensive analysis of each episode of Seasons 3 and 4, which can be found on my public blog and is available for free. For the 5th season of The Chosen, Authority. Jesus is instantly brought into conflict with members of the Jewish religious establishment as a result of his triumphant arrival and the purification of the temple. The issue of authority is at the heart of this conflict among the parties involved. There is a question that arises among the chief priests, Sadducees, and Pharisees regarding the authority that Jesus possesses to participate in such disruptive activity, for example, Matthew 21:14-16, 21-27, and to make threats of divine vengeance against the temple, John 2:18-20, Matthew 26:61-63. In response, Jesus calls into doubt the spiritual authority of the religious establishment and warns that the approaching judgment of God would bring an end to their reign, for example, Matthew 21:28-44, 22:1-11, Matthew 23. At the same time, he invokes his own messianic authority, for example, Matthew 22:41-46. The Sanhedrin considers Jesus' assertion that he is the divine authority of the Son of Man to be blasphemy, Matthew 26:63-66. As a result, Jesus is ultimately executed for making this assertion, Daniel 7:13-14. It is partly because of Jesus' assertion of power that he finds himself in conflict with Rome. However, despite the fact that he deftly escapes an attempt by the Herodians to lure him into openly rejecting Caesar, Matthew 22:15-22, Jesus' claim to messianic authority brings Caesar's own authority into question, John 19:12. In spite of the fact that Jesus is able to persuade Pilate that his spiritual authority is fundamentally separate from the authority that Caesar possesses in the world, John 18:33-38. Pilate is astute enough to see that such nuanced distinctions will not spare him from being judged as a traitor if he allows Jesus to be released. When Pilate insists that he has the right to either free Jesus or crucify him, and when Jesus virtually begs Pilate to answer his accusers, Jesus clarifies that Pilate actually does not have genuine authority. Rather, he is only an agent of those who are above him, namely our God and Rome, John 19:10-11. During the events that take place during the Last Supper, Jesus has one more opportunity to instruct his disciples on the characteristics of genuine leadership. In order to accomplish this, he moves around and washes their feet, which is an action that is often carried out by slaves and not by masters or other individuals in positions of power. After that, he invites his disciples to do the same for one another, John 13. It is not by self-exaltation and dominance that true authority is demonstrated. Rather, it is through self-sacrificial service that true authority is demonstrated. Furthermore, Jesus encourages the disciples to invoke the authority of his name in their prayers, John 14:12-14, and he expresses his commitment to share even more authority and power with them when he sends his Spirit, John 16:7-15. It is the purpose of the Passover holiday to recall the enormous act of judgment that God performed against Egypt, which was the means by which he gave salvation to the Israelites. On Palm Sunday, the multitudes that greet Jesus as he enters Jerusalem share the hope that Jesus is going to execute a second Passover, so delivering salvation to the Jewish people once more and enacting God's punishment upon Rome. But rather than launching a rebellion against Rome, Jesus uses a variety of prophecies, including parables, for example, Matthew 21:28, 28, 22, 14, symbolic acts, for example, Matthew 21:12, 16, Matthew 21:18, 19, and explicit prophecies, for example, Luke 19:41, 44. Matthew 24-25 to foretell the great act of judgment that God will carry out against Jerusalem, the temple, and the Jewish leaders. It should not come as a surprise that his word is falling on deaf ears, just as it was in the days of Isaiah. God has given the leaders over to their own foolishness, blinding their eyes and hardening their hearts, John 12:37-50. At the same time as Jesus is anticipating the approaching punishment of God against Jerusalem, he will also be subjected to the condemnation of the Jewish establishment and Rome. During the first half of Holy Week, Jesus is put through a series of tests and trials by a diverse group of religious authorities. Following the betrayal of Jesus, this figurative trial is transformed into an actual one, and the Sanhedrin renders a verdict, which ultimately results in his execution. After that, he is brought before Pilate, who decides that Jesus is innocent and makes an attempt to pardon him, but in the end, he decides to sentence him in order to please the people. The reason that Jesus makes the decision to go through all of this suffering is because he is truly dedicated to carrying out a second Passover. However, rather than bringing vengeance down on Rome, Jesus will bring judgment down on himself by drinking the cup of God's wrath, Matthew 26:38-44, in order to spare his disciples the burden of having to do so. In Matthew 26:26-29, he asks his disciples to eat his flesh and drink his blood, which is a component of the new significance that he invests in the holiday of Passover. In Matthew 24:45-51 and Matthew 25:1-46, Jesus tells his people to remain true and attentive with a sober mind. This is in anticipation of the judgment that will soon be coming against the unfaithfulness of Jerusalem, as well as the false judgment that his followers will soon experience under the leadership of the Jewish organization. The Bible passages Matthew 26:20-25, Mark 14:26-31, Luke 22:31-27, and John 13:21-38 all state that Jesus is aware of the fact that his disciples are weak and that he anticipates the manner in which they will betray him. Even staying up to pray proves to be too much for them, despite the fact that Jesus encourages them to pray for the strength to withstand temptation, Mark 14:32-42. Because of this, the disciples are unprepared when Judas aggressively betrays him to the religious authorities. They fail to reply to their attackers with violence, and they also fail to run when they are attacked, Mark 14:43-51. Simon Peter, of course, fails in the most glaring way possible, as he denies Jesus 3 times when he is being questioned by servants of the chief priests, Mark 14:66-72. According to John 13:1-2, the fact that the disciples disobeyed Jesus serves solely to call attention to the extraordinary faithfulness that Jesus shown toward the disciples. According to John 18:7, when the soldiers arrive to take him, Jesus refuses to let his disciples fight and die for him, and instead surrenders himself so that they can be released from their crucifixion. When the high priest queries Jesus about his followers, Jesus refuses to throw them under the bus, even if Peter is denying him at the very same moment, John 18:19-26. He chooses to wash the feet of all of his followers, including Judas, despite the fact that he is aware that they would all soon fail or betray him, John 13. This is perhaps the most amazing and remarkable thing that he does. It is possible that the events that are covered in The Chosen Season 5 are more closely documented by Scripture than any other period. Furthermore, the scripture that covers this period can be quite dense, which means that there are a lot of potential topics and concepts to investigate in this season. It's possible that I'll want to come back and write a piece that's very similar to this one, focusing on love, the approach to violence and peace, and the Spirit, all of which might be key topics in Season 5. It goes without saying that there is a plethora of other smaller themes as well, such as the perilous temptation of wealth, the nature of genuine devotion and sacrifice, the contrast between happiness and sadness, the habitation of God, the world and Satan, prophecy, and so on. In addition, there is a possibility that there are additional themes that are tied to the characters and narratives of The Chosen. Once we begin to receive a trailer that is more substantial, we will have a much better understanding of the concepts and ideas that will be addressed throughout the presentation.